Hey everybody, welcome. The Bedbug Guy is here after a little bit of an absence. Please forgive me, I'm in the middle of selling one house and buying another and moving. So trying to fit stuff in between is rather difficult, but I thought I'd make a video on the episode of Expedition Unknown that was recently on where Josh Gates and the crew there visited Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. I thought I'd give my thoughts on some things that were covered in the video because I follow alternative history and regular mainstream, and this video seemed like kind of a PR thing for Turkey and the corporation that runs Göbekli Tepe. But we'll go through what they talked about and give my rousting opinion, and you can either agree or disagree, and feel free to drop your hate and roast in the comments. I do enjoy the engagement. So they start off talking about Göbekli Tepe and how it is confounding and shouldn't exist because it is 12,000 years old. Now, before we go on, I want to remind everybody of something that most of you in my secret society and many of you already know. As Graham Hancock and Jimmy from Bryant's Insight and others have pointed out, Göbekli Tepe is a humongous site, and currently they've only excavated about 5% of it, and no plans to expand those excavations at any point in the future. For whatever reason, they give something about preserving that for future generations. I don't know why. And when they do the drone shots, you can see all the olive trees they planted on the site, which was extremely stupid in everybody's opinion because those could destroy the archaeology beneath them. I think Graham Hancock said in his last lecture that they did finally remove those. So that's good. So remember that. All the data they're talking about comes from this tiny fraction of this site. Okay? They haven't excavated any of the other enclosures that they know were there from the surveys. There's tons of other structures. The site's huge. They've only excavated maybe 3 enclosures, and it's about 5% of the site. So everything they say comes from this site. The 12,000 year date comes from what they've currently excavated. So the site could be older if they expanded out their excavations. But right now, we're going with 12,000. Still older than any civilization currently known. So first he meets Dr. Jens Notroff, who's worked with Klaus Schmidt for a long time, who was the original excavator at Göbekli Tepe. And they get exclusive access down into the excavation, which is covered by a giant cover that looks like a sail, which is kind of bizarre, but I guess to protect the site is what they're saying. So he goes down. They say it was likely roofed and covered. And they don't give any evidence for this other than some wooden posts that were in there, or post holes. So for some reason, Jens is convinced it was covered with a roof. But from what I can tell, they don't really know that. That's kind of one of those, you're assuming that it was roofed. You think it's roofed, but you're not exactly sure is the answer. It might have been roofed. And that kind of plays into what he says in a little bit. He says it was used for about 1,500 years, as far as they know. Remember, only 5%'s been excavated. Very small fraction. So then Josh asks who and why. And then they go actually inside the excavation, which you have to have special permission. I'm going to tell you this. To get permission like that, you kind of got to clear what you're going to talk about. Usually, especially when you're dealing with the Turkish government. I know they do this in Egypt too. If you're going to go in and get this access and talk to the excavation person, they kind of don't want you expanding off into things that they don't want to talk about. But, okay. Dr. Notroff says this room is circular. It's 65 feet long. And Josh points out there shouldn't be 65-foot rooms in the Stone Age. And that is correct. They did not have any metallurgy, as far as they know. Uh, they did not have the wheel, as far as they know. This is what Josh and Dr. Notroff bring up. They also, as far as they know, didn't have domestic animals, yet these Stone Age hunter-gatherers carved 9-ton blocks out of limestone, pulled them about 1,000 yards, and then set them up. Now, nobody disputes this, but somehow people think that Gobeklitepe was built by hunter-gatherers, yet can't wrap their mind around that 6,000 years later, an advanced civilization with advanced agriculture and metal tools and the wheel and whatnot couldn't pull off a pyramid. But I don't want to get into that right now. We're talking about Göbekli Tepe. Dr. Notroff says, yes, if you have enough people, anything is possible. And Josh agrees, which should apply to anything. I want everybody to remember that. So they go and they examine the animal carvings. And these are Neolithic hunter-gatherers that built it, and they carved these animals. What's it for? So Josh brings up the usual things that he's heard. It's an observatory, a calendar, it was built by aliens, or it's influenced by a lost civilization. So Dr. Notroff says he doesn't believe it was a calendar because they had roofs on it. And once again, I have to ask Dr. Notroff, how do you know for sure that they had roofs? Just because you found post holes doesn't mean they were holding up a roof. Okay? Doesn't mean. There is some archaeoastronomy that does kind of tie to the positions of the enclosures, as Graham Hancock brought up, but that's Graham Hancock's work. All I'll say is he may be onto something, but even the archaeologists have to prove what they're talking about. Not just Graham Hancock or anybody else, but so do the archaeologists. And for me, they don't have proof there was roofs on these. They just think there was. Okay, so you can't automatically dismiss an observatory. Then he says, what about a calendar? And he says, well, what need would they have for a calendar? And it says it goes off of these V marks, and they think these are marks of the days of the week. But look around, these V marks are everywhere. So it's just decorative. Well, how do you know they were decorative? It could be a calendar. It might not be a calendar. But all those marks could actually be writing, and you just don't know it. So personally, for me, I wouldn't dismiss it being used as a calendar either. I also wouldn't dismiss that those V marks are just decorative. Okay? Just because they appear on the people and they appear on the walls, that could be writing, and you just don't realize it. These people could have had writing. We don't know. Like I said, they're not going to excavate anything else anytime soon. The answers could be further out. Who knows? We're not going to know. Okay. He automatically dismisses aliens. He says, don't even talk about it. And you know what? For the most part, that's a high bar of proof. If you think this had something to do with aliens, the burden's on you. But I encourage you to go out and find your evidence. But to me, I don't think aliens were involved. But I could be wrong with that one. But he's going to dismiss that outright, and I'm going to let him do that. Then he says, no, he doesn't think it was a lost civilization's influence either, which is, I find that extremely odd that he would say that, considering he's literally standing in and working on the ruins of a lost civilization. He has no clue who they were. So Dr. Notroff is going to rule that out. The bedbug guy, I'm not ruling that one out. It's entirely possible. Like I said, they could excavate the rest of the site and find a whole lot of stuff. But they're not going to anytime soon, as they've repeatedly said. Now Josh points out that, and Dr. Notroff agrees, that you just don't come out of nowhere of primitive cavemen, basically, and build a giant stone monument and structures, right? And like I said, Dr. Notroff agrees, and he says that this stemmed from woodworking. Okay, now that may be possible. because it's, it's soft limestone and stone tools, and they just, we can work wood this way, well, let's work stone that way, and boom, we have 9-ton pillars being erected. Yeah, no, this would have had to go on for a while. Not to mention, if you notice, all the carvings are actually in bas relief, which is the most pain in the ass way to carve anything, let alone wood. Even wood you would carve into it. Are you going to carve the bas relief out of stone, or are you just going to carve it into it? It seems rather sophisticated and quite a process, because they did a really good job with some of these bas reliefs. He says, what was this place used for, Dr. Notroff? And he says it was a place for ritual. And he says clearly about animals, to where they go into building B and examine the really nice high relief bas reliefs. Okay. And that's Dr. Lee Clare they go into. And he says, okay, rituals. So they're looking around and they find a skull fragment. And he says, oh, if you look at it, you might be able to see cut marks from defleshing, but he never finds them in that one, or at least if he did, he didn't point them out. He says he thinks this is for a skull cult, that they defleshed these skulls, carved them, and made them decorative. And then Josh says, well, why do you think this? So they go over to this high relief of a leopard who clearly looks like it's starving, by the way, and it appears to maybe be hunting a boar. And he points out these perforations around the leopard through its tail and whatnot, where they may have put cords through and hung things, and he says that he thinks they hung the skulls there. This was a skull cult. Well, that may be possible, but you didn't find any skulls hanging there, did you? Or in a multitude of skulls and cords around there. Or at least he didn't say he did. He just thinks it's a skull cult, because they found pieces of defleshed skulls. Now, that may be possible. But a few fragments and some holes in a pillar doesn't make a skull cult, or them using skulls as decoration. They could have hung anything on those pillars. Truth is, nobody knows. Maybe if they excavated more of the site, they might find that it is a skull cult, or something else was hung through those holes, or those holes had a whole different purpose. So, skull cult, maybe, but I don't think we could dismiss anything else at this point, in the bedbug guy's opinion. Okay, then he says something that I always like to say, which holds true. Don't use a modern view point to look at what you're looking at. And that's true. You can't have the modern view of modern construction techniques and modern attitudes when you look at this place or look at a pyramid. It holds true with anything. That kind of makes you go, well, this isn't possible, because you're looking at it from a modern point of view. Then he says, these may have been narrative centers, places where they came and told stories. Maybe. Who knows? But the truth is, you don't really know. Then he says, there's no evidence that there was any conflict or wars or anything, except defleshed skull fragments might be evidence of conflict and war. But they choose not to take that view. Who knows? So they go back to over to B. They find Stone Age tools, and then they find a bead that holds holes drilled straight through it, tiny holes. And that seems rather, for a Stone Age, from what we know of the Stone Age, rather high-tech and sophisticated, in my opinion. He says they use flint drills. Okay, but he doesn't show us a flint drill. Maybe, could be. I don't know. I've never heard of that. He may be right. Then they find a piece of what he says is a stone scepter, and this is high evidence of hierarchy. That this is, they had leaders, and this came out of nowhere. Okay, so they had leaders. Big deal. That's a human thing. Tribal mentality goes back a long way, but he thinks there were no kings at this point, he says. But then again, how do you know? You don't. So, but then this is evidence of hierarchy. Right. Okay. So somebody had to be in charge to build these buildings. I don't think they did it all in consensus. Humans aren't that way. So then he says, wait, there's another site close by, and then Josh takes forever to get there, and it doesn't look like it's very close by. Karahan Tepe. Sorry, it dates to the same time period as Gobeklitepe. So he goes up there and he says, Dr. Nashmi Kurul. And he takes him into Karahan Tepe. And he looks, and he also is convinced that this place had a roof, but no evidence of that. So it maybe had a roof, maybe it didn't. Who knows? They do, but that was 12,000 years ago. And they pretty much have the same carvings all around of animals and whatnot. And then they have these pits that he thinks were graves that they routinely opened up and defleshed skulls for their skull coat. But no real evidence of skull ritual. They just think it is. Then he shows Josh the phallus room, which has the snakehead guy coming out. And then, of course, they throw out a few dick jokes and laugh about it. And then Dr. Kurul thinks this is a rite of passage room that you had to find your way out. It was filled with water. You had to find your way out through a bunch of dicks. I think that would be a rite of passage, but okay. Then they go out and find an exciting discovery. They find a carved head figurine, a human head figurine, which is, it looks really good, very sophisticated. And then they decide to name it Fred Flintstone. Okay, great. Modern Stone Age family, jokes fly. Then he takes him over and he says, well, over here, these are domestic buildings. He's like dwellings that are surrounding the central center. And he goes, so people were living there at Karahan Tepe. So you had the central area, the room of wieners, and then they were living there, apparently a skull cult, whatever. And in the dwellings, they find they weren't using pottery. They carved all these stone vessels, and they have them stacked up. You have stone bowls, stone plates, mortars, and pestles. They look great. Look awful sophisticated for Stone Age culture that came out of nowhere, that was originally carving with wood. But, okay, but no evidence of a previous civilization influence there, I guess. But seems like these people were way more advanced than what we're giving them credit for. Then he says they buried everything intentionally. And Josh asks, why would they do that? And he thinks it was a change in beliefs. And then Josh, over the narration, says maybe it was climate change, maybe it was their animals, or maybe they invented agriculture and decided to go off. But these people were living here year round, and they didn't already have agriculture, and they're building these giant stone cities, more or less, without agriculture, strictly on hunting animals. I think maybe they need to excavate some more, and at least with Karahan Tepe, it looks like they're going to, as far as I've heard and as far as what they're saying, they might find evidence of agriculture. But they have these stone vessels laying there, still have the dirt in them, they haven't tested anything. What was in those stone vessels? Maybe they'll find evidence of agriculture. I don't know. So they do this drone scan with the thermal, and they find that there's another stone circle just a short distance away and probably a whole other site. So, what do I think? And I've told you throughout this. Well, it's definitely extraordinary. It definitely rewrites human history with an actual civilization, and they admit civilization from 12,000 years ago, right after the Ice Age. Very sophisticated civilization. It definitely makes you raise the eyebrows and go, Is this really the first place? Or is there an older civilization? Maybe. I don't know. Is Graham Hancock right? Is he on the right track? I think essentially he is. And I think that Göbekli and Karhan Tepe definitely lend credence to what he's saying, that there might have been an advanced civilization predating that. I mean, why not? Look what they found. Look what they're excavating. And it may be older than 12,000 years old if they would excavate some more. So that's what I think. I think it was more or less the episode. I really wanted to go there, but the company that runs it and the Turkish government more or less use this as a PR thing to go, hey, it's all just mundane skull codes, animal worship. Yeah, it's old, big deal. Oh, we don't know where they came from, but definitely not a lost civilization, even though this is a lost civilization. Kind of weird. I find Gobekli Tepe weird, and hopefully one day we'll have some answers. But at this point, everybody's ideas are good until one of them is proven absolutely correct. Anyway, thanks for stopping by and listening to my stupid opinion. If you want to hear any more of my stupid opinions, please watch my other videos. Or subscribe, give me a like, give me a hate. Doesn't matter. I like engagement. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you next time. Bye.